Noah's Ark, thinking outside the box.
The key problem that people have with a global flood is the Ark.
One of my pet peeves is opening up children's books and looking at a picture of Noah's Ark looking like an overloaded bathtub with giraffes sticking out the chimney about to sink at any moment.
Genesis 6:15 says it black and white, 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high. As soon as you see those dimensions, 300 by 50 by 30, you should be realizing that that story is very authentic.
Noah and his wife, along with Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives, departed the ark and entered a whole new world. Imagine the exciting stories they passed down to their children and the generations that followed. Distorted by repeated storytelling, these accounts, found around the world, have fallen into the category of ancient myths and legends. Although they're only shadows of the actual event, the bits of truth they do contain coincide dramatically with the real story.
I remember one of the first times I went to the Brisbane Museum in the city of Brisbane in Australia, and I saw this interesting series of books about Aboriginal myths and legends concerning the Australian Aborigines, their Dreamtime legends that were handed down. And so I bought the books and I started to read them. And as I read them, I was amazed because I thought I was reading Genesis 1 to 11. I mean, it was a little different, but there was a story there about a global flood and a man who built a boat and 3 sons on the boat and so on, a rainbow at the end of the flood. And the reason that you see so many different legends and different cultures around the world, and even going back to the Babylonians, that sound just like Genesis 1 to 11, is because they have a basis in truth.
The story of Noah's Ark, written before Genesis was written by the Babylonians in the Gilgamesh epic, which has been discovered in cuneiform tablets, tells us that the ark was built in 7 days by Utnapishtim and was a cube 180 cubits on each side.
There's a contradiction when you claim that the Bible got its story. The source of the story for Noah's Ark comes from these other legends, because these other legends have got lots of mistakes in them. They say silly things like they're making a ship which is a cube, and other mistakes which are quite obvious. The proportions in the Bible are very realistic, so realistic that those proportions happen to match a modern cargo ship. And we wouldn't expect that. If that was a made-up story, we wouldn't expect them to accidentally come across 300 by 50 by 30 cubits as the proportions of this imaginary vessel. For example, when they make cargo ships, 50 by 30 would be just the typical proportion you'd see in the cross-section of a cargo ship. Gives you about the right stability, not too much, not too little. In fact, those proportions are so good that one of the naval architects that I've been working with, he actually realised that Genesis was literal because of those proportions in Genesis 6:15.
Tim Levitt, a mechanical engineer and supervisor of the Ark exhibit at the Creation Museum near Cincinnati, began his quest to come up with a possible description of an ark design that would complement Noah's shipbuilding abilities.
What was the technology like at that time before the flood? Well, there are a couple of clues in the Bible. First of all, the long lifespans. If a person lives for centuries, they're going to be very competent. They're going to be great at a lot of different things. Also, they're very healthy. To live that long, it implies that you would be a very healthy person, good concentration, healthy body, etc. So you're very capable and able to output a lot of work.
The Bible makes it absolutely clear that the first people on this earth were the most brilliant people. Technology, of course, had not increased to the extent it has today, but the intrinsic brilliance of man is such that even Tubal-Cain, long before the flood, was an inventor of every cutting instrument of brass and iron.
We would expect that the technology was probably a similar level to ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, China, for example, and perhaps similar to the pre-industrial revolution in Europe.
Noah, with the available technology and tools and help available to him to build this, over the 120 years that God gave him, was perfectly capable of building such a gigantic bark.
Working with two naval architects on the other side of the world, Tim quickly discovered that the familiar box shape would not fare so well at sea. The flat sides and bottom would give the passengers a very rough and even dangerous ride. Tim built several 6-foot models for some open water testing. One of his models was built to the specifications of a PhD naval architect. The model turned and aligned with the wind, in contrast to the box-like boat that rocked sideways on the waves. He took this discovery and applied it to his proposed model of the Ark. Was this a logical model based on information given in the book of Genesis?
The first question is, what were the conditions like for Noah's Ark? Was it dead calm, or were there waves, wind, etc.? Well, there's a number of clues in the Bible. The first clue is that Noah had to build something that looked like a ship. It wasn't just any old shape, it looks very ship-like. That 300 by 50 by 30, that's a big clue. That looks like a ship. So we're expecting the water to act pretty normal. It's like the ocean because we're building something that looks like a ship. There's other clues as well. For example, in Genesis 8:1, God sent a wind, and wind creates waves. The Bible doesn't specify a wind-catching feature on the Ark, but it does tell you a relatively long hull, and that is not exactly what you would expect. If you were just designing a vessel to float on the water, you wouldn't make it so long. It takes more work to build it long, it takes more wood, and it's more of a danger as it crosses over waves that it could break. What makes the most sense is that the vessel was built for comfort as well as strength and capacity and seakeeping. So you have to balance all these factors together. In order to make it comfortable, you want that Ark to be running through the waves, not side onto the waves, which it would fall into naturally. There's a number of ways to do that. All you need is any sort of wind obstruction on one end. It could be a sail, could be a building, could be a wooden fin. But I wanted something which was low maintenance. I didn't want sails that they had to look after. So if we just build a wooden fin to catch the wind on one end, and at the other end I wanted something that would catch in the water. And the usual way to do that is to have a thing called a skeg, which acts like a rudder at the back of a ship.
Once Tim had completed his Ark model, he noticed a remarkable resemblance to ancient ship designs.
What I ended up with was something that looked familiar. It looked a little bit like the designs of ancient ships, such as the Greek triremes and more ancient ships. What I noticed on the ancient designs is they had high stems. And a lot of the very ancient ones had high stems on one end and an extended mysterious appendage on the other.
Were the features in these ships leftover technology from Noah's Ark itself? We can't say for sure, but it's possible that the storm weathering design that Tim developed for his Ark is seen on some of the earliest ships.
Historians who've been studying ships have found these appendages at the back of ships. Now, some people have thought that they were prototypes of the Greek ramming bow, but this is at the back, not the front. This stern appendage is called a mystery if you don't know what it's for. But if you view it as part of a storm-keeping package in conjunction with a high stem at the other end, then it makes perfect sense. So maybe these ancient shipbuilders knew exactly what they were doing. Or maybe they were just copying features from Noah's Ark, which they'd seen their fathers and grandfathers do.
What about the construction of the Ark itself? How could such a large wooden boat hold together, especially in rough seas? A recent documentary produced by the BBC scoffs at the idea of a wooden vessel 300 cubits long.
According to Tom Vosmer, an expert on ancient boats, not even 19th century engineers could have built an Ark that big out of wood alone. Even 19th century boats had steel frames inside wooden frames.
The problem with a 450-foot boat made of wood is that the wood as a material cannot maintain the shape of the boat. And the boat would start to distort at sea, the seams would open up, and it would sink.
It's a safe bet that a wooden ark that size would have sprung hundreds of leaks along the length of its huge hull and sank like a stone.
One of the things that seems to bother people who are against a literal interpretation of Noah's Ark is the scale of the ark. One of the things that they say is you can't build a wooden ship that big. In the same breath, they would usually pick some ships from 100 years ago, maybe the 18th, 19th century sailing vessels, and say, well, they had trouble getting boats longer than 330 feet or so therefore it's impossible for ancient people to build Noah's Ark.
An ingenious construction method seen in ancient shipbuilding that used edge-jointed planking puts the BBC's faulty claims to rest.
In this exhibit of the Ark under construction, we're treating the planking as exactly the same way as the Greeks did the planks. When Greeks built their ships, the large ships, they used to use multiple layers of planking, and they had this special trick where they had joints in between each plank. And you can see the joint here, they're a tenon, and they fit into a mortise in the adjacent plank, and that locks the two planks together. There's no way they can move, there's no way that they can break a seal and let the water in. This is a very advanced technique. In fact, it wasn't even seen at all in any of the ships built in the last few centuries in Europe and America. We believe this method would allow the ship, the Noah's Ark, to be built without any problems at all with movement of the planks and leaking, which did plague some very large wooden ships. Interestingly, wooden nails, called tree nails or trunnels, are actually a very successful way to join planks to the frame. The reason these work so well is because, first of all, they're a nice big diameter, so it doesn't dig into the wood. But what happens is, when water hits the wood expands, seals off the hole, and makes it impossible to remove. Now that's a lot of work. It's too much work for the shipbuilders in 18th, 19th century. They weren't going to bother with that. And that's why their ships used to loosen up. In fact, they used to call the ship a tight ship, because when they first started it was nice and tight. All the joints were held together because they hammered the cotton and they hammered the caulking in between the planks, which made the ship tight. But after a while it became, well, a loose ship. The ancient Greeks, however, had much higher quality in the hull. They built the hull with planks that were mortise and tenon, throughout thousands of mortise and tenon joints. It doesn't take any high technology, it just takes more labour.